Uh, so shall we start the meeting, the webinar?
Yes.
And Mr. Akhtar?
Yes, by all means.
Yes, so as I said, good evening, good day, wherever you are. My name is Abdul Hamid Hathiani, and I just wanted to sort of start this webinar. So I was thinking about it as to, starting this webinar, and just a short while ago, sitting here in Toronto, I was having tea, and and I thought about it, and I said, "Oh, that's so interesting." I'm having tea from Kenya, some dates from Saudi Arabia, some cookie bites from Australia, and some kinafa from Lebanon. How interesting, how diverse can it really be? And but if you really look at it, that's the extent of the diversity in most instances. There is, however, so much more to it, and so hence this webinar and training workshop on developing intercultural and holistic competencies for success. And it's been organized, as you by now you know, it's being organized by the Center for Excellence on Empathy, Equity, and Diversity. And so, as I said, my name is Abdul Hamid Hathiani, and I'm going to very briefly introduce the Center for Excellence on Empathy, Equity, and Diversity. In short, we call it SEED, C-E-E-E-D. SEED aims to engage in social justice and civic engagement to build a more empathetic and equitable society across all sectors in the community. So SEED's strategy actually is to advocate for a more equitable and diverse society, and to network with like-minded people and like-minded bodies as well, to be inclusive in community training initiatives, to coordinate and disseminate relevant resources, and to conduct research and studies in this field. So the board of directors for SEED, C-E-E-E-D, is also very diverse. It comprises of Dr. Mohamed Taher, who is from Toronto, Dr. Anita Coleman from California, Sarala Utangi from Brampton, Dr. Laura Edith Coleman from Drexel University, Shaliza Jamal from Toronto, Triveni Kochi from New Jersey, Dr. Kishore Satpathy from Kolkata, and Alicia Sloboda from Winnipeg, Manitoba. And not to forget, I'm here in Toronto as well. And so SEED continues to organize webinars, it shares resources, it publishes a newsletter every month. And if you're not getting any one of those communication or newsletters from us, please sign up, and we would gladly include you so that you can be updated as to what's happening in this field. What are we working on? And we are trying to organize a webinar, pretty much at least one webinar every month, and focus on some research as well, and share some resources with the community. So without wasting much time, let us get onto the program today. And for that, I would like to introduce the MC for today, Mr. Shahid Akhtar, who is an alternative dispute resolution ADR practitioner and president and CEO of Conciliators Without Borders. He has written the 7 C's Compass for Conflict Resolution, a practical guide for real ADR, which was recently published by Amazon. Since co-founding the Canadian Association of Jews and Muslims 26 years ago, he has been actively engaged in promoting a Canadian model of understanding and bridging the divides between faith and intercultural communities. Mr. Shahid is currently writing a book. I don't know where he gets all this time, but he's currently writing a book, The Reluctant Cousins, Jewish-Muslim Relations in the 21st Century, Imagining the Possibilities. Mr. Shahid also offers pro bono services resolving conflicts in family, business, community, and interfaith settings. And as you can see, Mr. Shahid must be extremely busy with all the work that he's doing. And so I have the pleasure to welcome our MC for today, Mr. Shahid Akhtar. Mr. Shahid Akhtar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hathiani, and welcome all to the webinar. Today's theme is development of intercultural and holistic competencies for success. Now, considering that we only have 1 hour for the seminar, I'd like to do away with any detailed welcome address and get right to the presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping notes though. We have strict time constraints, so I will announce the time limit for each speaker and we'll send them direct message on chat if necessary. Also, if you have any question, I'd like you to try to formulate them as you are listening to the presentation. Please submit the questions in the chat as they occur to you, because then they will have a better chance to be answered by the chief speaker and the panelists. My introduction will be brief, so if speakers want, they can include necessary details of their work experience in their own presentations. Now, without much ado, I'd invite the chief guest of today's webinar, Professor Mark Berkson is the chair of the Department of Religion at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. He teaches courses in East and South Asian religions, Islam, and comparative religion. He is the author of Cultural Literacy for Religion and Death, Dying, and the Afterlife, Lessons from World Cultures. What wonderful titles. His presentation today is about developing skills for personal transformation and competencies for organizational transformation. Dr. Berkson, you have 10 minutes for your presentation, and then we can revisit the subject during question and answers. Dr. Berkson.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And given the short time, I'll just go as fast as I can and dispense with any kind of introductory remarks about myself. And I'm not going to be using a PowerPoint. I thought this would just be a conversation. So if you wanted to just open the screen up for everyone to see each other, that's fine with me too. But I just want to begin by thanking Mohamed Taher and everyone at the Center for Excellence on Empathy, Equity, and Diversity for inviting me to speak today. And I'd like to thank our moderator, Shahid Akhtar, and my fellow panelists, whose expertise and wisdom I will surely benefit from. Most of the talks that I give are at religion conferences. So I particularly appreciate this opportunity to be at an event with representatives from the place that has played such a profoundly important role in my life, but that I rarely get a chance to talk about, the library. So before I begin my formal remarks, I just want to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to the directors and the staff of academic and community libraries. I have loved libraries from the time I was a child. I've embarked on more journeys from libraries than from airport terminals. But it's only in the last decade or so, the golden age of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and propaganda masquerading as news, that I began to fully appreciate the importance of libraries to our communities and to our democracy. Thinking about this event has also led me to reflect on the profound transformations that libraries have had to undergo with the digital and internet revolutions. The questions that students, and all of us actually, used to ask that brought us to the library was, how can I find information on my topic, right? So libraries filled in the gap, the information and knowledge gap. But now, libraries must teach us how to skillfully navigate a world in which endless streams of information and misinformation are bombarding us constantly. So what happens in a library then, and I think that's behind part of the title for today, is as much about the cultivation of skills and competencies as it is the acquisition of knowledge and information. Among these skills is the ability to critically evaluate the legitimacy and trustworthiness of information and sources, of course. It's not enough to care about the truth and want to pursue it. One needs the tools and methods to find and discern it. But in addition to that, libraries and universities must teach skills that enable us to realize our commitment to diversity and inclusion. Not only do these institutions teach these skills, they also model them. They can show how community spaces and collaborative projects can bring together people from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives, and enable them to engage in meaningful, illuminating conversations about important topics. So in my brief remarks today, I'm going to focus on the specific issues of religious diversity and comparative religion, and then interfaith dialogue more specifically, and finally, the role that libraries play in both of these. But my last preliminary remark, I want to just focus on the words used in some of the literature about this seminar: interfaith and intercultural. And I think it's significant that those were the words chosen rather than multi-faith and multicultural, because whereas multi refers to just the fact that many traditions or cultures are going to be represented and studied, a focus on interfaith and intercultural requires engagement between and among traditions, and therefore requires a reflective engagement that is consciously comparative and dialogical. And this requires the development of skills and methods that enable us to do that work effectively, because there are many ways that it has been done poorly. So for instance, in the early history of comparative religion, there were thinkers who, though groundbreaking in their application of more academic and scientific methods to comparative religion, were still driven by either explicit or implicit assumptions of Christian supremacy that made comparison a vehicle for evangelizing or apologetics. The practice of comparative religion has also been tainted by tendencies towards exoticizing on the one hand, or domesticating on the other, the religious traditions of others. It's essential to do comparative work well, because, as I'm about to argue, it is the basis of all understanding. So let me explain that. One of the European scholars who was the first to undertake the academic study of comparative religion was Max Muller. And he famously said, "The person who knows only one religion knows no religion." And he reminds us that in order to truly know any one religion, we have to engage in comparative study. Moreover, we have to undertake comparative religious studies to even have a concept of what religion is. The very concept of religion, and any concept, comes from comparative study. So when Muller was asked what is gained by comparison, he replied, "All higher knowledge is acquired by comparison and rests on comparison." Professor Jonathan Z. Smith makes this thought-provoking claim. He said, quote, "Religion is solely the creation of the scholar's study," unquote. So the claim that religion is created by the scholarly intellect seems false, right? I mean, after all, religion is out there in the world, isn't it? But do we ever see religion in the world? I mean, what do we actually see? We see a group of people singing songs of praise, or an individual sitting on a meditation cushion, or someone leading the community in the reading of a text, or a family gathered around a table sharing a ritual meal. What allows us to look at these countless examples of human activity in all their boundless variety and say of all of them, oh, that's all religion? It's the scholar that notices these commonalities and establishes the criteria for any phenomenon to be considered a religion. So Smith argues that religion is created by imaginative acts of comparison and generalization. The very concept of religion, like all concepts, emerges from the process of comparative observation, inquiry, reflection, and analysis. Well, one important context in which we can engage in the comparative study of religion is interfaith dialogue. The practice of comparative religious studies and interfaith dialogue can be threatening to some people. They have to open up to a tradition other than their own. And because religion can be an existential encounter with a worldview and values different from ours, it can raise profound questions, and it could be unsettling. but it also has the power to be life-changing in a profound and positive way. The encounter with other religions is not simply an academic project. It's an ethical undertaking. As Abraham Joshua Heschel said, no religion is an island. Understanding one another better is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And learning about other traditions and participating in conversations with members of those traditions provides us with a model of what we all need to do anyway, particularly in light of religious diversity in our nations and neighborhoods. Work through passionately held differences with civility and sophistication. Jack Miles writes, looking at the religions of others, even from the outside, but with a measure of openness, empathy, and goodwill, can enable those of any religious tradition or none to see themselves from the outside as well. And that capacity is the very foundation of human sympathy and cultural wisdom. So the secular study of religion can open up new worlds to the visitor's gaze. And to put it somewhat dramatically, I think that engaging deeply in the study of comparative religion provides skills that are crucial to good citizenship in any religiously diverse nation. So if we proceed with care, judiciously, with mutual respect and openness, we are rewarded with a deeper understanding, not only of the other, but of our own traditions and therefore ourselves. Learning to bracket one's own view and imaginatively take on the perspective of another requires creativity and spiritual humility. It involves the recognition that one may have only a partial or limited perspective. Heschel writes that humility is the beginning and end of religious thinking, the secret test of faith. So comparative study and dialogue enables us to see the value and moral importance of both our commonalities and our differences by learning to see our face in the face of another while preserving the other's difference and uniqueness allows us to experience the truth put so powerfully by Miguel de Unamuno. I am a human being. No other human being do I deem a stranger. The process of comparative religion involves not only learning about the other, but also learning along with the other about the meaning of our lives. So that is the end of my formal remarks, more or less. But what I want to do in the couple minutes I have remaining is to conclude with a few thoughts about libraries in particular and the role that they can play in this process. And since the panelists know a lot more about libraries than I do, I'm only going to say a few things here. And particularly, I want to focus on the various ways that libraries in my life and the life of my colleagues have supported religious and cultural diversity, comparative religious studies, and interfaith dialogue. So I'm going to focus very quickly, it's just a list, on 8 ways, and then I'm going to hand it off. We'll go to the panelists. Okay, so number 1, and this one is, of course, a classic role played by libraries throughout history, is providing books, and now, of course, online resources, to support courses, programs, and events that are connected with diversity, religious and otherwise. I have seen a tremendous value of libraries creating these, especially now, online guides to any event that we put on that focuses on multidisciplinarity, because religion is fundamentally a multidisciplinary field. So it helps when faculty and students can see how sources from theology and philosophy, anthropology, sociology, history and the fine arts, all these different disciplines shed light on and are needed to fully understand religion. And these are, of course, textual. I love texts, scriptures, and all that, but I am increasingly aware of the importance of online video and music type resources, because I want students to experience living religions, right? So that they could see both the textual foundation, but also when people live them, that it's not always in accordance with orthodox doctrinal textual stuff, right? So showing them people performing rituals or being interviewed about their religious commitments has been invaluable. Second, faculty library partnerships. So we do these first-year seminars, and one of the things that we do is have librarians come in and talk about how to use sources, how to critically examine, the legitimacy of sources, and they use software to assess student learning across the semester in using those sources effectively. Third, libraries can provide a physical space for multi-faith gatherings and interfaith dialogue. And fourth, they can provide resources for the participants and attendees in those events. So for example, I've put on events here, multi-faith events, including one called sacred sound, music from the world's religions. Another one on mysticism from different traditions. The library then creates a big display where they'll have books that people can read to provide background for the event, and then artwork. And there could be like an exhibit there that goes with the event. And then they'll do follow-up events after that, right? To reinforce the lessons learned. So that's all very helpful too. Fifth, another kind of space, which I think some panelists will talk about, prayer and meditation spaces. We have some of these on my campus, but getting ready for this event showed me that perhaps we should think about it specifically in the library, because our spaces aren't in the library. One of them's in a second floor above our dining hall, but it's in the library where students are there for hours. They're not just popping in and out of the building, right? Like they're with a cafeteria. And that's where they're doing their research and feeling the stress of exams and papers and projects. How beautiful to have a space to escape from all that and to center oneself and to meditate and pray. Also, having the room in the library brings students to the physical building. And too many students are only connected with the library virtually now, right? So we want to get them inside. Sixth, libraries have organized wonderful learning communities. They did this, for example, at my institution in Hamlin with a Hmong studies group. We have a lot of Hmong students in St. Paul. Actually, it's the highest concentration of Hmong, one of the highest in the United States, from Southeast Asia. And we did seminars on Hmong language, music, culture, clothing, food, religion, shamanism, all of that, sponsored by the library. 7 is reading groups. We've had speakers from different traditions come into campus, and before they get there, the library will get copies of their books and we'll all read them, faculty, staff, students together. And then when the speaker comes, the speaker will address the group who has been studying their work, which has been wonderful. We've done it with Wendy Doniger and Bart Ehrman and Joseph Goldstein and a lot of wonderful speakers. And the last thing I'll say is that libraries are a beautiful place to bring together diverse groups of people, students especially, in collaborative projects. And these projects do not themselves have to be directly about religion or cultural diversity, because simply working together with people of diverse cultural backgrounds on a common project is itself a lesson in navigating all of the challenges of diversity. So if you look at a group like the Interfaith Youth Corps founded by Ibu Patel, that group, he noticed that people don't just want to come together and talk theology all the time, right? There's a lot of old scholars getting together doing comparative religion. Young people want to do service projects. So he would get diverse groups of people from different religions to work side by side on something that all of them find meaningful. And through that process, they learn about each other's traditions organically and are transformed. And I've seen versions of that in the library when we bring together diverse groups of students on these common projects. So I have been extremely grateful for all the support we've gotten from our libraries. So thank you all. I'll stop there and I look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berkson. This was really profound. I thoroughly enjoyed it, very informative, very inspiring. Now we will invite panel members to the discussion, lessons learned, best practices. So panel members will have 5 minutes each to introduce their topic, and they can elaborate further at the question answer session if necessary. The first speaker of the panel is Mr. Bernie Hawke, who will speak on development of the prayer and spiritual space in Dunedin City Library in New Zealand. Mr. Hawke has been the manager director of Dunedin Public Libraries, the oldest free public library service in New Zealand since 2002. Before that, he was the director of special collections at the State Library of Queensland in Australia. Mr. Hawke, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akhtar. I'd like to share my screen if I may, so I'll just get that in place.
Yes.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So my talk is really going to be about the development of the spiritual and prayer space in the Dunedin City Library. Just a little bit about Dunedin first. Dunedin, that's a very picturesque view. And in New Zealand, we typically commence a talk with an introduction in Te Reo, the Indigenous no mai haere mai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, which basically means hello, welcome, and greetings to you and to everyone here. A little bit about Dunedin. Dunedin is the second largest city in the South Island, New Zealand, and population roughly 135,000. The area was originally settled by the Kaitahu people and Kati Mamoi in the 12th century, 13th century, and Scottish immigrants arrived in New Zealand in the 1840s. And as was introduced, Dunedin is the oldest free public library in New Zealand, founded in 1908 at the Carnegie Library. And Dunedin is also the site of the oldest university in New Zealand, the University of Otago, founded in 1869. And a little bit more recently, Dunedin was designated a UNESCO City of Literature in 2014. So in terms of developing a prayer space within the Dunedin City Library, some of the key drivers were that the Dunedin community, which is very Anglo-Saxon oriented, experienced a great increase in its diversity, particularly with the resettlement of former Syrian refugees in 2016. A flow on from that was that the City Library was used, particularly by the Red Cross, International Red Cross organisation, as a homework group for young people from the former Syrian refugee community. And we very quickly learned that there were limited or no options for people from that community to practice their faith, particularly within the structures of our building. So we tried to respond to that community request and need to develop a prayer space within the City Library. And we considered that approach, while not only does the public library provide a range of print and non-print materials, we also felt that the public library was an important community space, and that also needed to reflect the needs and aspirations of the communities. So what did we do next? We researched existing prayer spaces in libraries, and we discovered that essentially in New Zealand there were very few. University of Auckland has a prayer space, the Auckland International Airport has a prayer space, and our own University of Otago had a prayer space, which I had the opportunity to have a closer look at. We also consulted with our Interfaith Community Council, which included representatives from Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, and Baha'i, a whole range of different faiths within the community. This group was their mouthpiece and their advocacy group. So we consulted closely with that group, and also particularly with the Otago Muslim Association. And we spent essentially a period of a couple of years trying to work out what was the appropriate space and how would that space be used if we were to develop one. So what we did is that as a result of that consultation, we partitioned 2 spaces within our city library, and the spaces are roughly 15 square metres, and we officially opened that space in August 2021. So I'll just show you a few photos of those spaces. So that's a shot from the opening ceremony, and you can have a close look inside the spaces. So they're fairly sparsely furnished, a few seats, some prayer mats, qibla for orientation for Islamic prayer. And particularly importantly, we had no publications or religious documentation of any sort within the space, emphasising the interfaith nature of that space. You can see a range of the people who were present at that official opening, and they represented different faiths within the Dunedin Interfaith Council. So the service model that we developed, which was a rather challenging and interesting part of the whole process, was to work out how were we going to offer the space so that it was respectful of all faiths.
Bernie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but some people are saying that they cannot see your picture and your voice is a little bit low. Could you please speak up and just double check the pictures again, please? Without, you don't have to go back all the way, but start with the current pictures. Share the screen. I think Dr. Taher can help you share the screen.
I'll stop sharing just at the moment, and then maybe we can reset. Yeah. Can everyone see that screen now?
Yes, now we can.
Yes, we can. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So,
Start from where you had left. Yeah.
okay. I'll just I'll start from here.
Yeah.
Yep. So, this screenshot is of the official opening of our spiritual and prayer space. So, behind where I'm standing, you can see 2 rooms that are fairly sparsely furnished. We have a few chairs, some prayer mats, a Qibla orientation for people of Islamic faith, and essentially the rooms are quite open. They can accommodate up to 6 people, and there's another shot of that official opening with representatives of the interfaith group. The service model that we developed for the prayer space was one of the most interesting and challenging parts of the exercise. We decided that we would have 2 separate spaces, one space for women of all faiths and a second space for all genders and all faiths. And we felt that in balance, that was the most respectful and inclusive way that we could offer spaces for people of any faith or even no faith to quietly reflect, meditate or pray using that area. We make the spaces available for up to 30 minutes, and we also provide access to the space that is mediated by staff. And again, we agonised a little bit on that. Unlike the universities, which have a sort of electronic swipe card system where people can admit themselves to the space, the public library doesn't have that facility for the general public. So access to the spaces was mediated by staff, particularly to ensure safety and privacy of those areas. So the community response to the development of the prayer space was overwhelming support from the Community Interfaith Council and the Otago Muslim Association. They were rapt. They were so delighted. Conversely, we did receive a range of critical responses in the media, which we acknowledged and respected, that people will have varying viewpoints, but fundamentally still felt that the development of the space was an important community initiative. And sort of ironically, when at the point at which we were opening the space, New Zealand went into lockdown to do with COVID. So the usage of the space from its opening was rather limited, but has certainly picked up since COVID has become less of a community threat. So that's the end of my presentation. Tēnā koutou. Happy to answer any questions in the Q&A part of the session. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Bernie. This was, sorry, this about some technical hitch, but it came through all right in the end. And like the bard said, all is well that ends well. So now I would invite Kelly Gotschalk, Director of Development and Major Gifts at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU Libraries. Ms. Kelly Gotschalk leads philanthropic effort on behalf of VCU, focusing on building endowments, special projects, and gift planning. The title of her presentation is Caring for Students' Mind, Body, and Spirit, the Planning of VCU Libraries Reflection Room. Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you all having me here today. The first thing I will say is I'm talking about the planning process because we don't yet have our building built. Let me try and keep to this 5-minute time period here. So I'm going to go on here. A few facts about VCU in case you don't know. We have 28,000 students, 82% of which are full-time. We draw very heavily from Virginia. I will say that we draw heavily from Northern Virginia around Washington, D.C., which is probably the most diverse area of Virginia. It's really wonderful. We also have over 1,000 international students from 102 countries. We also are very much a first-generation college culture at VCU. We have a diversity statement. I'm not going to read it to you because it's a bit long, but there it is. This is really something that we have been working on. We did start on it before the pandemic and before all of the things that you saw Richmond in the news for over the beginning of the pandemic. But we are committed to it and always working towards being a better, more inclusive culture. The Cabell Library, we have 2 library buildings, but the Cabell Library is on the Monroe Park campus and was finished in 1974. So we finally got an addition to it in 2016. We were able to add a third more space, but double the seating. The emphasis is on comfort, connectivity, and function. Our original building is called Brutalism in Style. It's a great description because it is pretty brutal. It is not terribly comfortable. So the new addition is much more so. But we identified a need for an interfaith prayer meditation space before we started building. Quite frankly, we have a lot of Muslim students and they pray in the stairwells. And the stairwells are not very nice. And so I think that got us to thinking about it. And then when you think about the stress on today's students, it's just something that's needed. Now, we did have a retirement of a dean who had been there for 21 years, and with that I was able to raise $235,000 in private funds to build this space. Being a public university, we cannot use public funds for this, so we have some money in the bank and are hoping to get it done. The pandemic hit, our dean retired, we had a hiring freeze. We finally got a new dean a year ago, and she's been working on this ever since. So reconfigured and relaunched. This is the current area where we're going to build. It's a very underutilized area, as you can see. And these are the architect's plans. We're calling it the reflection room. We just want it to be very clear that it's about your faith no matter what it is, and some faiths are not as documented, I suppose, as others. So this is the interior room, or the interior view looking east. There's our view southwest. So the process, what we've done, we did preliminary designs and a cost estimate in order to raise the money. Then we raised money. Then we had to get design changes and current costs. We've shared that with the stakeholders and gotten some feedback. We're now to the point where we're at our final design and we're going to sign off on that, and it has to go to bid. That should happen any day now. We hope to lock in the winning bid and schedule construction. We'll share the news hopefully this fall and start the build in the spring. And perhaps it'll be done by next fall when we'll hold the ribbon cutting ceremony. This is a white knuckle experience going out to bid right now with the construction market in the States being what it is. We're just terrified that somehow we won't have enough money. So, but it is going to get built, and the governance, the emphasis is going to be on the use. It's for the use of individuals. It's not for large groups. It will not be reservable, so it's there for you to use when you need it during library hours. We're open. I believe we're going to be open 7:30 a.m. to 2 a.m. This semester. We used to be open 24 hours a day, but we stopped that with the pandemic. It's shared space. It'll accommodate many users at once. We have some storage. At the beginning, you saw the entryway, so that'll be unlocked. If it's very valuable, we'll suggest that you don't leave it there. And then we have security guards because we are an urban public library. So they'll just kind of peek through as they wander around to make sure everybody's safe. And then we did engage VCU's Interfaith Campus Ministries early on as consultation, and we'll rely on them to help us figure this out if any issues arise. So that's what I have. Perfect timing. My timer just went off. Thanks.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much, Kelly. This was really very informative, and your background was fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, our third presenter is Anna Cascone. Anna is the librarian generale of the Brothers of the Christian School in the beautiful city of Rome. She will speak on the topic, Lasallian Libraries, Prayer and Intercultural Dialogue, the Lasanian Education Mission.
Okay.
Anna.
Okay. Oddio. Just a moment. Scusate.
I think we lost Anna.
My guess is she's probably going to be logging back in and then setting everything up. So if you want to, I don't know if somebody else can fill in that space for the 5 minutes. It may take, oh, there she is.
She's back, but if things aren't
back.
working right, Emily and I can go ahead. But
Is she back? Great. Fantastic, Anna. Welcome, Anna. Please go ahead.
Anna, you need to unmute yourself.
Anna, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to give our input to this meeting. In my presentation, I will illustrate the various aspects of for sharing and promotion of prior between the library and our communities and schools. I will illustrate in this minute to introduce the role of Lasallian Research and Resource Center. I will tell you about how our center is at the service of prior, both as an object of research and as an activity promoted in our schools. I will mention one Lasallian prior, and I will finish with a brief overview of our YouTube channels. Saint Jean-Baptiste de La Salle was the founder of the Institute of the Brothers of the Christian School, patron of Christian teacher, born in an aristocratic family in France in the 17th century. He dedicated his entire life to the education of poor children. De La Salle contributed significantly to the entire field of education with his writing and innovative methodology. Today, the Great De La Salle family is made up of more than 3,000 brothers who, together with the 9,000 educators, lay collaborators, assist in more than 1,100 educational works in 80 countries, more than 1 million pupils, including children, young people, and adults. The Generalate of the Mother House of the Brothers of Christian School is the resident of the Superior General and his council. The secretariats and service of the center of the Institute are organized to help the Brother Superior General and his council in the government and animation of the Institute. The Lasallian Research and Resource Service works in the production of the Lasallian thought in dialogue with the living tradition of the Institute and the context of the 20th century. The library becomes a supporting tool to tell the story of prayer, to document the evolution of the ways of praying, using the photographic archives to show moments of prayer. Some example. This is in Rome, 1941. The Institute was converted to an hospital for war amputees. Prayer was the way the brothers used to live with the soldiers. Now we turn to another story documented with photos from the archives. The story of a young student attending the Lasallian school in Milan who died for a serious illness at the age of 14. The record of the photographic archive shows us the brief existence of Aldo Marcozzi. Furthermore, the picture shows the day of his funeral and prayers he wrote in an act of adoration. some moments of pride during the Superior General visit to Saigon in 1962. Here is an example of a publication dedicated exclusively to the Lasallian School, a biography of the saint and a prayer dedicated to him, realized by a brother Mario Chiarapini. Some YouTube channels example. Brother Mario Chiarapini has also opened a YouTube channel where you can find several of his songs for prayers, liturgy and catechesis, etc. A song for all LaSalle people to sing together. This song was composed for the LaSallian Philippine Child YouTube channel. Prayers in LaSallian School, some original production. The LaSalle Research and Resource Center promotes the dissemination of the one LaSallian prayer, a prayer that unites all people without barriers or borders across cultures and religions. I'm very sorry to not have enough time to show you this beautiful project made by one of our teachers from the St. Joseph Institute International in Malaysia. I just want to show you some screenshots from the video of the one LaSallian prayer. These drawings were realized by the children to illustrate the prayer. I have the pleasure to close my presentation with this beautiful review entitled The Promenade d'Aujourd'hui, published in Salon de 1853. Thank you. Sorry for the problems.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Thanks a lot. Now, our final presentation of this segment is by two distinguished speakers from Pennsylvania, Christina Riehman-Murphy, Open and Affordable Educational Resources Librarian in Penn State Libraries, and Emily Mross, Business Librarian, Penn State, Harrisburg. They're also to take 5 minutes jointly, and it is up to their discretion how to divide these 5 minutes between themselves. They will speak about religious and spiritual spaces in academic libraries. Please
Thank
go
you
ahead.
for that introduction. Thank you. I will skip our introductions then, we're good. So Emily and I have been investigating student use of library spaces for religious and spiritual practices for about 6 years. And our interest in the topic came from experience on the job, where both of us were aware that students, primarily Muslim students, were using the libraries we both worked in as a prayer space. At my library, on that top left picture, in the book stacks, and at Emily's library in that bottom left picture in a lightly trafficked staff area that had been designated as a space for prayer. By our own observations, religious practice in the library was something primarily associated with Muslim students, but we knew that that assumption was based only on what we directly saw in our libraries and was very much limited by our own bias, with both of us coming from Christian traditions. So we wanted to know more so that we could fully understand the scope of religious and spiritual practices in academic libraries so that we could better accommodate our students and provide for these needs. So we started having conversations with librarians in our state. We relied on resources from the Interfaith Youth Corps, and we launched a research project, which led us to discover a number of prayer, spirituality, and reflection spaces in academic libraries, both at Penn State, in that bottom center picture, and at other universities in the United States, which you can see on the right. So to formalize this research, we began with a national survey, which we distributed online to each state library organization in the United States. We also conducted a student survey, and following that, we conducted focus groups with Penn State students. So what did we learn? Well, from our survey of 84 academic library professionals and 147 students, we were affirmed that what we had observed was not just unique to our libraries. 50% of the respondents reported providing either a formal or an informal space for prayer in their library. 50% reported observing students praying in the library. And I think significantly, their responses were not impacted by whether the institution was a public institution or a private institution, or whether there was actually a chapel on the campus. Students were using the library to pray. And those student responses confirmed that the library was actually their top place that they reported praying on campus, with the classroom building being second. And on the right, their reasons they gave for praying in the library were because it was quiet, afforded privacy, was generally in a convenient location, provided safety, and there was small room availability. From our focus groups, where we asked students about their experience with praying on campus, came 7 themes. Having a designated space that was convenient and flexible, and which was wonderful to hear. Accommodating for multiple religions was important to the students. They also wanted some ownership of the space and to be able to reserve it in advance. Privacy was also significant, and some female Muslim students indicated that there was a lack of understanding regarding accommodations needed in the spiritual spaces for their modesty, like partitions around washing areas. A number of students mentioned prayer as a stress relieving activity beyond just a religious obligation. Overall, it was great to hear that students felt comfortable practicing their religion on the Penn State campuses and felt that it was respected. We asked students to describe their ideal prayer space as if there were no limits. Answers converged and there was nothing outlandish. They wanted a simple space that they could manage and book with security for religious items to be left behind. They wanted to be able to share their space with other religious groups. They wanted simple spaces. For Muslim students, they wanted a washing space that could be separated. I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about what implications are for libraries that are thinking about providing a campus for spiritual or prayer space.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. And it's nice to kind of really hear some of the things that we discovered from talking to our students are being put into place by some of the previous presenters. So I think we're all kind of going with that same general flow. Next slide, Christina. So we learned a lot through our observation and discussions with our students, and we encourage all of you and others that you might work with to look around your libraries and see what spiritual practices might be happening there. If you don't feel comfortable approaching individual students, one of the things that we did was meeting with student religious groups on campus. So both of our campuses and most of our campuses at Penn State have a number of recognized student groups that are affiliated or do promote a particular religion. And they were very accommodating and welcoming to meet with us. And that's actually a major way that we did recruiting for our focus groups. Another thing could be to speak with student affairs or any other offices on your campus that oversee student organizations. They may have some additional insight that could be helpful for you in guiding your space. It can be really difficult in a library to know what spaces are being used for what purposes. I think those of us that work in libraries definitely realize that. You don't necessarily know that something is happening, at least until after it has happened, or perhaps someone is calling the front desk to complain about it. So asking the students themselves what they are using those spaces for, or what they need a space for that perhaps is not being fulfilled, can help you understand if you're meeting those needs and what you could do to make it easier for students to pray in the library. Because as we learned, it's happening whether or not you actually provide a space for it. One of the biggest things that we wanted to share with professionals is to understand that as long as whatever a student is doing in the library space, if it's some type of prayer behavior, as long as it's not disruptive or dangerous, you should allow students to continue with that prayer behavior. It's not something that you need to police. In the States, there has in the past been a number of instances in which police were called on Muslim students who were praying in Arabic in stairwells and things like that, because there was really a misunderstanding about what was happening. And so having that understanding, having that cultural competency to see this is what's going on, this is a very normal behavior, we don't need to draw further attention to it, and we certainly don't need to call security on this behavior, is really important to help people feel like they belong and that they are safe to practice their religion in the library. Next slide. So if you are creating an inclusive space, some of the logistics that you might want to be aware of that we saw in the schematics from New Zealand and also from Virginia Commonwealth University is to have a space where you can place shoes or other items that people might take off before they conduct their prayers. If you have the ability at your library to check out or store a prayer rug or other small items that could be easily just kept behind a desk and handed out. One of our campuses at Penn State does keep a prayer mat at the library desk, and then students can just check it out directly from the desk. At my library, when we did have that space in the library, we kept the prayer rug in the room, and the students just, put it back when they were done and took it out when they were using it. It's really important to keep the walls neutral and blank. Different religions have different beliefs about images and what should or not should be in a place that you are practicing that religion. So neutral is best. And furniture is very simple as well. So a chair to sit on and remove your shoes, or to sit on while you are praying. a shoe rack to hold those shoes, and then shelves to hold any other small items. Could be really helpful to do focus groups with the students on your campus so you understand what kind of religions are being represented and what those needs might be. As Christina mentioned, even within the same faith groups, so when Christina mentioned that our female Muslim students said, this is a problem, the male Muslim students on campus didn't realize that that was a problem until everybody was sitting in a room and talking about it. So having those focus groups is really important, not just for your understanding of what students need, but for students to interface and see, oh, I didn't realize this was an issue. This is something that we can help advocate for with you, because we realize that we want everyone to feel welcome in this space and be able to use it. And then one way that you might promote it or get more buy-in is to work with those student organizations to collaborate on displays that celebrate their faith or help explain it to others who might not be familiar with it. Adding materials from those faiths to your collection so that people can borrow them and read them, and organize events that help build cultural understanding. Next slide. So lessons that we learned about inclusion, I've mentioned a few of these already. So us hearing the students talk to each other was really important. So it's not just us gathering information, but the students sharing amongst themselves what's really important, what they could work on together and what they could collaborate on. And then letting those students lead the effort. They are going to be the ones that are using it, and they'll be more likely to use it if they had the buy-in to make that space usable for them. If the student behavior isn't disruptive, unsafe, or against your policies, let it go. It's totally okay. And one thing that you might find is that you're expecting the needs to be very complicated, but they're actually not that complicated. The materials are very simple. And even if you can't provide a dedicated space, having a prayer mat available that students could just borrow and then go into a study room or other small place in the library would fill that need if that's all that you have. If you don't have an advisory board of other students already, that's a really great way to get some of that feedback and include all of this training and things that we mentioned into regular staff training. So it's not at Penn State, we have previously had a diversity day. We're really trying to be a lot better about making sure that engaging with diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility is an ongoing process and not something that we just focus on at one particular time of the year. As Christina mentioned at the start of this, it's been a big thing for us to unpack our own experiences. And as we've gone along with our research and writing, it's been important for us to be like, okay, but this is from a Christian perspective. Is this something that's really inherent to Christianity that we're wording incorrectly or that we're not understanding, and getting some outside perspectives on that? And finally, if any of you are viewers of Ted Lasso, we encourage everyone to be curious and not judgmental. That really means a lot for students and for building that understanding. I want to know why. I'm curious about why. I'm not judging you and asking why. I want to know more. And then we just have some recommended reading and resources. I won't read all of those to you, but we do have things from Interfaith Youth Corps and other groups that have already been mentioned that we highly recommend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina and Emily. And also like to say at this point that like Christina and Emily both have offered that they'll be pleased to share their links with others. So you have each other's email addresses, I hope. By all means, get in touch with each other for getting links. These are very precious links. Now, we are already running quite behind. We have exceeded our time for question and answer, but I would like to still have at least a few minutes for question and answer, and maybe maximum 3 questions perhaps. So you can go to, at the bottom of your screen, you will see reactions. And if you go to reactions, you can click on raise hand, and we will entertain at least 1 or 2 questions to begin with. If I don't see any raised question, I'll just quickly ask one question from Dr. Berkson, that do you think in your experience, you have the services that you provide, the insight that you bring to the whole question of libraries in terms of attracting people, young students to go into this line of career? How does your services help them? Dr. Berkson?
So just to clarify the question, you're saying like, how do sort of the things that I teach or the things that we do on campus help students determine their careers down the road in the future?
How can they use it to how can it attract them to come into the libraries and
The library
the
specifically.
librarian? Yeah.
Well, yeah, so two quick things. I mean, the first thing I would mention is so many students that I see, and I would very much be curious to hear if this is true on other campuses, everything in the library for them now is just about efficiency. So they'll do everything they can online, right? They'll have the books held for them. They'll have the video resources streamed to their room, and then they'll go just to pick something up, and then they'll leave. One of the first things I tell students when they're a first-year student on campus is, you have to find your places on campus, a place where you can go. Don't tell anyone else where you're going, turn off your phone, bring your books. I said, the library is a beautiful place for that. I said, you get yourself a carrel or go into the quiet floor or whatever. I want them to just begin spending time and then to explore the resources. But realistically speaking, given how much is now available online and how much people just use that, I would say the library needs to draw them in with activities, events, exhibits, programs to get them to physically go. And I think COVID affected everything too, because people just learned to do everything from their own rooms and they didn't want to gather and go physically. So now we're trying to bring them back. And if I can pose my own question to transition here, I'm just wondering how it is we try to communicate to students the value of the actual physical materiality of the things that we study, the texts, the scriptures, the artwork, the artifacts, because they're used to everything on screens. Oh, I can just see a reproduction of this. I can just see a copy of that or whatever. So is there a value to it? To getting people to reconnect with the original presence of the material object? And is that something that you're trying to do to bring them in for that? Or do we just sort of say, listen, as long as they're learning, if it's all digital and online, we're still happy with that?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, as I said, we have already exceeded the time, but I will just, because I just saw that chat from Emily and Christina, that their enrollment has really shot up. The question I have for both Emily and Christina, if you can be very brief about it, when you accommodated Muslim students a great deal, and I just would want to know, under the current political climate in the United States, what was the reaction of different groups of students to your accommodation of the Muslim students in particular?
I think it really has depended on the campus. So at my campus and Christina's campus, we are extremely diverse campuses. My campus has about 13% international students, and also a number, so not even just international, but diverse in terms of domestic students as well. When we did the focus group for our students, they said that they felt that everyone that they interacted with on campus understood that if they saw what they were doing, even if they weren't Muslim, they'd know that they were praying, and they felt safe to pray wherever they wanted to, that they would not be disturbed or attacked or anything like that. We went to Penn State Barron, which is all the way up in the corner. If you're familiar with Pennsylvania geography, if I'm using my hand, it's the thumb, it's the chimney. That campus is a bit more isolated. I would say is probably not as diverse. And when we held that focus group, only one student was remaining from the Muslim Student Association. And she told us that she did not feel safe praying in any place that someone could see her, because people asked her what she was doing. They questioned her, not that they were like, I think they were curious, not necessarily being judgmental, but she didn't like that. She felt like attention was being drawn to her. Whereas my campus, people were just like, oh, whatever, going on with my day. I don't think that we ran into any situations where people felt that certain religions or groups were being privileged over another. That was one of the really positive things that came out of our focus groups, is that there really was kind of an ecumenical interfaith kind of collaborative idea that was coming out of the students sitting down together. We did have students from all different faiths sitting at those tables when we did the focus groups, and they were really interested in how they could support each other so that all of the groups would get the resources that they needed.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, as I said, that we have already exceeded our allocated time for questions. I want to really thank you very much. Time flies when we are having fun. But in any case, now I'm going to invite Dr. Mohamed Taher to conduct his Train the Trainer workshop on how to promote IDEA. IDEA is acronym for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access in Work Culture. And very, very briefly, Dr. Taher is the Chief Information Officer, Canadian Multi-Faith Federation in Toronto, a Fulbright scholar, and serves as a faculty, Seneca College, Liberty Information Technician Library, Information Technician Program. Take it over, Dr. Taher, and thank you all once again.
Hello, everyone. Again, this is Mohamed Taher. I'm happy that we have people from across the globe, and this recording will be beneficial for people who have not been able to join us at this, I would not call auspicious event, but a very intellectual and very engaging and empowering moment. Thank you, everyone. The purpose of this workshop is to talk about peace and tolerance for civic engagement. And here I have embedded the 5 laws of Dr. Ranganathan, or 5 laws of spiritual care, but 2 different sources to come to 5 laws of peace and tolerance. And in the implications, it relates to digital literacy and how could libraries, archives, museums, and other institutions in the community, like tolerance promotion, peace promotion. There are many groups that are doing this activity, and they may find some helpful leads from this workshop. So to begin with, this workshop is brief, and I am not into theology. I'm not into rites and rituals. I'm not going to talk about religion or spirituality per se. I will be talking about how religion and philosophy, or religion and culture, can be embedded in terms of providing service to people of faith, of spirituality, or people of no faith at all, but they have values that matter in terms of understanding each other, understanding and building a peaceful coexistence in an area where people need, I'm sorry to say, more literacy. They need more awareness of the others in the society. So to begin with, this workshop has 4 segments that I'm trying to bring in. Number 1 is about recognizing and deconstructing hate violence qualifiers in terms of digital readiness. Number two on my list is the domains of care, because there are internal needs and there are external needs for all people, whether they are the staff in the institution that provides the service, or that is the people who receive the service. For me, as a person from within the information service providing industry, it is more for us to understand that there is trauma in the workplace, and to understand and realize, and to be updating the people who are responsible as leaders to provide more consideration for not just outreach, but also in-reach. So this is the second domains of care that I'll be talking about. The third is the 5 laws of peace and tolerance for civic engagement. And in the end, I'll give you some tips to take home so that you carry the message and continue reflecting on this peace and tolerance promotion activity. When we think of digital readiness, we have many areas which are good to go, and some of the areas are still needing some progress and some more efforts to make it digital ready. For example, at risk in the society and even within the information service industry is the scammers or online crime. Online crime is not just for the people who are in the society, it's also for the people who provide service. Like I'm a service provider, but I am hacked, I am sacked, or whatever is my internet access that is broken or that is stolen or that is getting alerts from scammers and spammers to say, my data is lost, so pay me something what I want and I'll get you free from my hacks. So this kind of violence qualifiers for digital readiness is including the kind of keywords and descriptors that we use, as well as the strategy to know the content of those issues and problems. For example, shared identity or shared values is one most important thing in the context of the peace and tolerance that I'm trying to speak about. Domains of care are physical, they are inner, and they are outer. For example, culture is one domain that I'm talking about, and there that includes, for example, cultural celebrations. The second domain that I would have here is heart or emotions. For example, coffee with the chief officer, now I call chief empathetic officer, for a move beyond raising awareness to take meaningful action on idea. Idea is inclusiveness, D is for diversity, E is for equity, A is for accessibility. So if the chief of the office or the chief empathetic officer is talking with people, say on a coffee break, and trying to make the grounds common for people to talk, to dialogue, to be able to reach each other, that is where there is a domain of care, whether it is physical, whether it is inner, whether it is outer. Again, for example, physical or body as a domain includes breaking a few stereotypes for sensitivity and care. The next slides will have examples of what I mean by sensitivity and care in terms of breaking the stereotypes. And at the bottom of this all is the trauma that is there, that was there, and that has been intensified by this COVID and the pandemic. The previous webinar we had here included a specific session on trauma and mindfulness. So if someone is interested in that, they can go to the YouTube where we have posted a link of our previous webinar. Another webinar we did was staff wellness, and that has been also recorded and is posted on the YouTube. So we have a series of topics that we are covering, and the present one is again influenced by the idea that we need to work more and more in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of diversity, in terms of equity and accessibility. The first law for peace and tolerance is information is for use, even for self-development. It's not just for education, it's not just for entertainment, it's not just for the publicity, it's also for self-development. It could be the staff themselves, it could be the users, or it could be anyone who is involved and needs to be engaged. What we bring as a strategy here is inclusiveness. The first law of library science, as given by Ranganathan, my mentor's mentor. I was never a student of Dr. Ranganathan, but I am a student of his students. And his first law says books are for use. Use here has been interpreted and applied in terms of use for the self-development, use for the promotion of peace and tolerance, as Dr. Ranganathan has also written on developing a compassionate atmosphere using library sources. So what's the part of trauma in this is the alienation, and alienation is, for example, I'm alienated because of my festival that I celebrate. Maybe it is a festival that is common in my geographic region, or it's a festival that is common in my culture, in my faith, and or in my belief. So for example, I have here an example of a festival literacy and how that can be illustrated. The example I have here is the display, or just as Professor Mark mentioned, about exhibits. Most libraries do these exhibits, and I've just tried to bring about some examples from the global libraries or information service providers that bring up literacy programs for faith-based or culture-based displays, programs, and activities which are done by these respective libraries and resource centers. On the right, you see a big display. That's a display of the week, and it's a religious or a book that relates to a specific faith group. And that's how libraries do many varieties of information service awareness and information service education programs. We go to the second law of library science, or second law of peace and tolerance, based on Professor Ranganathan's 5 laws. The second law of peace and tolerance for civic engagement is every citizen his or her information. Dr. Ranganathan said every book his or her reader. That was his original wording. Later on, I think it was modified to say instead of reader, it's the user, whatever the terminology which was changing since 1931 when he first coined the 5 laws. So here my second law is every citizen his or her information, where the society or the library or the workplace has disconnected or disconnects between people of majority and minority categories. And here I take the trauma infected or trauma affecting the minorities who are minoritized. And the education awareness is to empower, to identify differences and build bridges. This is the second law of tolerance, peace and tolerance. And the strategy is accommodating diversity for mutual respect, for mutual understanding, for mutual acceptance. Here I take the example of diet literacy, because diet has diet in terms of religious laws, diet in terms of spiritual practices, diet in terms of what people value as their internal or external belief system. So my example for diet literacy is with a quiz for faith groups, food or diet preferences. For example, number 1 is Anglican. Do they allow pork? Yes or no? This is a quiz. And this can be applied in many ways. This is just one example. Egg, is this allowed? Yes or no? Halal, is this required by any faith? Yes or no? Kosher, is it required by any faith? Yes or no? So this is a kind of a quiz that I have developed to understand different faith groups and their diet needs. It's a literacy skill for cultural food requirements. Each of these slides give you an example that can be applied or can be interpreted in the ways that each library or information service providers can use it, be it a museum, be it in archives, or be it in a community service organization. I have listed faith groups such as Anglican, Sikhism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Islam, Jewish. Why I bring Jainism, the religion that believes in non-violence? That is one criteria for this example here in peace and tolerance promotion. And Jainism is also about non-living things that they don't eat meat, they don't go close to egg, they don't go close to animals or any kind of food that is based on animal or human, a kind of non-vegetarian world. And similarly, the example of Sikhism, for example, it doesn't have the pork, or it doesn't come to halal and kosher. Eggs, I'll have to check whether they allow it or not, but the quiz is basically to make a thinking point, a brainstorming point, where people can think about the cultural food literacy skills. The third law of peace and tolerance for civic engagement is every information, its users. So the right side is a picture of Dr. S.R. Ranganathan speaking with someone in his work area. And this picture has two implications. I'll come back to that in a minute. Before that, I need to emphasize on what the law is trying to look at. Every information, its user. So Ranganathan's own word said, every book, its user, which meant that every book in the shelf, every book in the library, every piece of information in the information service providing resources should reach the users, whether the users are coming there or not coming there to that point. It's a duty of the people who provide information to outreach. This is the law that is about outreach. And the outreach word was not coined by Ranganathan, but he meant to say that you must go out to the users where they live. He initiated the mobile van, mobile information delivery system, which is another part of discussion, but I'm not going to go in that direction. But what is important for the third law is emphasizing on engaging. It's emphasizing and empathizing and engaging versus ignoring people, ignoring information needs, ignoring the people who are in the society, but we have not reached them. Because we don't reach them, and for my guess, it's about 50% of the community in a public library system, which I surveyed once, had 40% members from the community, 60% were not reached at all. I'll come to that if someone is interested in that reference later on. So in terms of trauma, there is a stress and there is humiliation of being ignored in the society. So the third law is applicable to outreach in these newer areas. And the example I have for this outreach is the dress example for digital literacy or a group conversation. Why I bring dress is, see Dr. Ranganathan, he's wearing a headwear that is very rarely seen in outside the culture that he belongs to. And the other guy, this other person speaking with him, wears a dress that is very unusual. I do not want to enlarge the picture, but I want to take you to the real scenarios of dress that are there in the world. This is not just one culture, one religion, one faith wearing the dress. It's a global example to bring awareness of dress. In every culture has got somewhere they have a dress that is looking similar to the cultural background of Muslims or Christian nuns or the religious leaders who are women in different faith groups. The next slide is similarly giving you a male example of the headwear dress. It is not just Muslims who wear headwear. It's not just the Jews who wear a head cap or a Sikh who has a turban and things like that. This is a global example of dress that is part of the headwear, the dress on the part of the symbolic representation of their respective cultures, respective faith groups. And this is a part of the awareness that we need to outreach and bring to people of different faiths, different cultures, different spiritualities, different traditions to know that there are dress issues that are part of the dress literacy program. The fourth law is, Ranganathan said, save the time of the reader. I apply it here and say, save the time of the citizen with loving fairness versus hating inequality and risk of tumbling in turbulence times to serve passionately 24/7. 24/7 is the idea that Ranganathan wants to bring in to say, save the time. Time is the precious value. Time is the precious piece of requirement of the users or the people who are seeking information. And I apply this to all citizens, whether they are users or non-users. And this dedicated service is with equity, which brings to an idea of inclusiveness, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Equity here is wherever they are and whatever they need is the issue that is to be resolved, is the issue to be challenged, is the issue that has not been major concern for many information service providers to reach who have not been reached. They may be minoritized, they may be disabled, there may be so many other people who have not been reached and they need to be approached and reached for information literacy. The example I have here for the literacy program is a faith symbol literacy. And the quiz I developed for the World Parliament of Religions, the audience who were there near my booth were served this questionnaire, and 90% of the people who responded to these questions were almost close to my expectations. To say, for example, if I show them a symbol of Sikh, without naming it as Sikh, and ask them whether it's a Muslim symbol, Hindu symbol, Christian symbol, or Sikh symbol. And 90 or 80% had appropriately given a response to the Sikh one, because there are other questions that are similar to each faith and their symbols which relate to that faith. Most of the global images that are there for the faith symbols are not defined or not labeled, are not described as they belong to which faith. So normally you see a golden rule poster. I'm coming to that golden rule poster, which has the name of the faith and a golden rule for each faith. And that is the way in which we can have literacy program using the faith symbols. The last law of peace and tolerance, or the fifth law, as I copy from the Ranganathan's 5 laws, this law is about information resource is a growing organism. Dr. Ranganathan said library is a growing organism, and I take this as information resource is a growing organism which has to have accessibility, which has to have enthusiastical approach to facilitate accessibility. It treat others the way you want to be treated. This is a part of the golden rule developed by Scarborough Mission and Paul McKenna. And thank you, Paul, for this great information literacy tool. And this has been a very good tool for schools, for educational academies, for colleges, for libraries and museums and archives and information service providers. For example, if they are to be treated without discrimination, without violence, how should you do about it? So the rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. If you want to be treated with violence, okay, go ahead. If you want to be treated with no violence, okay, go ahead. So strategies serve as peaceful and living organism. Example, non-violence literacy. Is non-violence literacy a single simple way? No, it's very complicated. For example, themes that are there in literacy program include moral injury. Moral injury is, for example, I have been facing mistrust, or I've been alienated, and that is hurting my morals. It has been injury that is not visible, not tangible, not calculatable, and not even to say, okay, this is the injury that I've received in my feelings. So the strategy for such a program is healing in non-violent ways. For example, I found a site that is coaching online. It gives you samples of how you could conduct non-violence literacy. Listening to others the way you like to being heard. Or you apply the strategy of forgiveness. Or you have another example of put yourself in someone else's shoes. These are the examples given by the site coachingonline.org to do non-violent ways, to bring awareness for non-violent, peaceful ways of encouraging an awareness of peace and tolerance. I'm not going to Gandhi, I'm not going to Martin Luther King, I'm not going to those worldwide leaders who have been responsible for interfaith dialogue for peace and harmony, but I would just mention that the UNESCO has built 5 laws of media literacy, and I am basing those 5 laws to be a supplement of my thing to say that there is already a platform of media literacy using 5 laws, and I present here the peace and tolerance as a component of 5 laws. Okay, so these are the tips to take home. Number 1 is browse a mile in your colleague's shoes. Browse a mile, walk a mile, think a mile, reflect a mile in your colleague's shoes. My colleague is from different culture, what do I do? My colleague is facing a grief or loss in his life, what do I do? There's a very good book called Perfect Strangers. Perfect strangers tell you what you should be doing when somebody is of not your culture and that person is facing a marriage or facing a death situation, facing a grief, or facing even a celebration. What do you do? What you should not be doing? That's a book called Perfect Strangers. The second bullet is you hear about rule of 20-20 for breathing. Sorry, I'm finished my 20 minutes of talk, but I haven't breathed even a second. So let me breathe for 20 seconds, allow you to breathe. That is the interactive workshop that I'm trying to be communicative, trying to bring dialogue, trying to bring thinking. Can you breathe for 20 seconds, please? Thank you. This is the rule of 2020 for breathing. Digital literacy has good example in this. For example, you can convey the idea that a person can watch computer, a person can watch mobile phone for 20 minutes and then break 20 seconds by closing the eyes or opening the eyes with a positive diversion and distortion. Positive distortion would mean looking elsewhere, looking at nature, looking at someone else who is in the room, but they are also human beings and you need to be respectful of who are in the same room, in the same atmosphere. So that is the rule of 2020 for breathing. The third bullet is about, remember the rule of EG20 for self-care. And the interpretation that the people who have expanded this rule says, achieve more with less in hand. For example, you have 80% of time and you need to include 20% for self-care. Self-care for my own eyes when I'm watching the digital screen is shut my eyes, divert my eyes, meditate, reflect, get out of that for 20 seconds because I've used 80% of the time without self-care. So I need to concentrate on self-care as a part of the peace and tolerance promotion activity. It's not just for the others, it's also for physician heal thyself. That's the good phrase that comes to my mind. The fourth item, the fourth bullet on my list is mindful of 50-50. The golden rule of reciprocity is to say that you do what you expect yourself from others. So the reciprocity of the golden rule makes you think 50-50 of your mindfulness. You are 50% occupied for yourself, 50% for the others. And that could be applied in terms of sorrow, in terms of anger, or in terms of joy, wherever and whatever is the situation, it can be incorporated for digital literacy programs. With this, I end my interactive workshop. Sorry, it's not been that interactive. I had plans for many things, but the time is running out and our MC will say, Mohammed, please stop now. Your time is up and up. So before I go, I have a display of 20-30 books that are there in the Canadian Multi-Faith Library, Canadian Multi-Faith Federation. There are idiots' guides, there are handbooks for prayers, there are handbooks for religious accommodation, there are handbooks for measuring religious ethics and values. Normally, these books are rare in one shelf in one library. So I brought them together to say that the multi-faith or interfaith dialogue and tradition can be furthered with librarians, with people who know where the books are and what the books are, and they can educate people in different dimensions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Taher. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I think we learned a lot from this presentation, and I must say we learned a lot from every presenter that came in today. Thanks again, and if you can, do keep in touch with each other. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for nice discussion. We are happy to listen views of all library professionals.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good day, or a good evening, or a good night.
Okay, thanks.
Good night. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Your cooperation and being awake. Some places it's good morning, very good early good morning, like Mr. Vivekanand Jain and myself.
Yeah.
3 o'clock in the night, sitting before the screens. Thank you very much.
Okay,
you
sir.
can go
Thank
back
you.
to sleep, Dr. Taher.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, sir.